The brass level in my hand was the only thing between me and the man dragging me from my car. My husband paid my parents to love me. Now strangers are trying to take me. I swung hard, metal crunching bone, and pinned him with my SUV. But the ledger I grabbed from the porch just revealed the truth. My entire life was a script, stage managed, and I'm the only one who doesn't know my lines. The first entry reads, Project Phoenix, Stage Management. My name isn't even real. The tires screamed against the asphalt as Sarah Miller gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white against the cracked leather. The scent of pine needles and old rain rushed through the open window, stinging her eyes. Every mile marker along the Hudson Valley Highway blurred into a gray smear. Her husband's voice echoed in the cabin, a low vibration beneath the roar of the engine. Your parents are on the payroll, Sarah. The speedometer needle climbed, 80, 85. She ignored the frantic honking of a sedan she cut off near the exit. Her breath hitched in her throat, tasting of copper and stale coffee. She needed the front door of that white Victorian house to be real. She needed the peeling paint on the porch and the squeak of the screen door to mean something more than a line item in a ledger. Sarah's lips moved in a silent, frantic rhythm. 1, 2, 3, 4. She counted the pulses of the white lines on the road, a desperate attempt to measure the distance between the life she thought she had and the wreckage David had just handed her. The argument had been a jagged thing, full of sharp edges and cold revelations. David had stood in their kitchen, his face a mask of practiced sympathy, and told her that the childhood she cherished was a fabrication. He'd said her parents weren't her parents, but employees of a firm she'd never heard of. It was a lie, she told herself. It had to be. David was the one who was sick, not her life. She veered onto the shoulder, the gravel spitting like gunfire against the undercarriage. The Hudson Valley mist hung low and heavy, a wet gray shroud that seemed to press the very air out of her lungs. The mountains in the distance were jagged teeth against a bruised sky. She wasn't just driving home. She was driving toward a confrontation with the ghosts of her own identity. As the road narrowed, the trees began to change. They stood in perfectly uniform rows, their branches interlocking like a woven fence. It was too precise, too intentional. Sarah felt a prickle of unease. As a landscape architect, she knew nature was chaotic, messy, and stubborn. This forest looked like it had been planted by a machine. 512, 513. She kept counting. The numbers a thin tether to reality, as the world around her began to feel increasingly like a stage set. The driveway appeared suddenly, a long tongue of pale gravel licking into the dark woods. Sarah didn't slow down. She slammed the SUV into a lower gear, the engine roaring in protest. She was going to see Eleanor. She was going to look into her mother's eyes and find the truth, even if she had to tear the house down to find it. Halfway up the drive, the world skewed. A black sedan, sleek and predatory, swerved out from behind a stand of oaks, its tires kicking up a choking cloud of dust. Sarah stomped on the brakes. The SUV skidded, the smell of burnt rubber filling the cabin as she came to a halt inches from the sedan's bumper. A man stepped out of the black car. He was broad-shouldered, wearing a dark suit that looked uncomfortable in the humid valley heat. He didn't look like a neighbor or a friend. He looked like a wall. He marched toward her window, his face a slab of indifference. "Turn around, Mrs. Miller," the man barked, his voice a low, gravelly rasp. "The property is closed for maintenance today. You aren't authorized to be here." Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. "Maintenance? This is my parents' house. Get out of my way." The man reached for her door handle, his fingers thick and calloused. He didn't hesitate. He pulled, the metal groaning. Sarah's survival instinct, honed by years of mapping exits and measuring escape routes, kicked into high gear. She reached into the passenger footwell and grabbed her heavy brass level. It was a solid, 3-foot bar of metal, cold and reassuring in her hand. As the man yanked the door open, Sarah swung. The brass level connected with his wrist with a sickening thud. The man let out a sharp grunt of pain, his hand recoiling as if he'd touched a hot stove. Sarah didn't wait for him to recover. She shifted into reverse, the gravel screaming under her tires, then threw the SUV back into drive. She angled the heavy bumper of her vehicle, pinning the man against the side of his own sedan. The metal crumpled with a screeching moan, a sound like a giant tearing a sheet of tin. The man was trapped, his legs wedged between the two vehicles. He shouted something, a curse or a command. But Sarah was already gone. She floored the accelerator, the SUV fishtailing as she roared up the final stretch of the driveway. Her hands were shaking so violently she could barely hold the wheel. But the numbers kept coming. 12, 13, 14. She reached the crest of the hill, and the house came into view. It stood bathed in the golden light of late afternoon, looking exactly as it had for 30 years. The white Victorian siding, the wraparound porch, the hanging ferns. It was a picture of domestic peace that felt, for the first time, like a threat. Sarah killed the engine. The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating, broken only by the ticking of the cooling metal. She stepped out, her heels sinking into the soft earth. The air smelled of lavender, a thick, synthetic floral scent that coated the back of her throat. It was too strong, like a perfume used to mask the smell of decay. Her father sat in his usual wicker chair, a folded newspaper resting on his knee. Robert. He waved, the movement practiced and fluid. But it was Eleanor she wanted. Her mother appeared in the doorway, the screen door creaking on its hinges. "Sarah, dear." "What on earth is that noise?" Eleanor called out. Her voice was thin and melodic, the same voice that had tucked Sarah in for 1,000 nights. Sarah marched toward the porch, her legs trembling. She searched Eleanor's face for a glitch, a slip in the mask. "How much, Eleanor?" Eleanor tilted her head, a small, confused smile playing on her lips. "How much what, honey? Are you all right? You look flushed." "The salary," Sarah spat, stopping at the bottom step. She counted the stairs. 1, 2, 3, 4. "What is my childhood worth per annum? How much did they pay you to pretend you loved me?" The smile on Eleanor's face didn't fade. It simply transformed. The warmth evaporated, leaving behind a cold, clinical curiosity. She smoothed her skirt, her bird-like features sharpening. The motherly facade dropped like a heavy curtain, revealing the professional handler beneath. "You were always so perceptive, Sarah," Eleanor said, her voice now devoid of any maternal lilt. "It was one of your most promising traits. But you were supposed to stay in the city this weekend. Your schedule was very clear." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. There was no denial, no shock, just a correction of her schedule. Sarah felt the world tilt. The house, the garden, the woman standing before her. It was all a construction, a cage built of wood and lavender. She pushed past Eleanor, her shoulder brushing against the woman's stiff, starched blouse. Eleanor didn't move to stop her. She simply watched with a detached, analytical gaze. On the porch table, next to a pitcher of iced tea that was sweating in the heat, sat a leather-bound ledger. It looked out of place among the rustic furniture. Too formal, too businesslike. Sarah snatched it up. "Sarah, put that down," Eleanor said, her tone as sharp as a scalpel. "That isn't yours." Sarah ignored her. She flipped the cover open. The paper was thick and cream-colored, covered in a precise, cramped script. Her eyes scanned the first page. Subject: Sarah Miller. Phase 4, Year 10. Behavioral Observation Log. There were dates, payment schedules, notes on her favorite foods, her fears, her academic progress. It was a manual for her life. Under a section titled Project Phoenix Stage Management, she saw her own name listed next to a series of numbers that looked like bank account balances. "It's all here," Sarah whispered, the words tasting like ash. "Every birthday, every scraped knee. You were just filing reports." "We were providing a service, Sarah," Eleanor said, stepping into the house behind her. "A controlled environment for a high-value asset. You've thrived here. Look at what you've achieved." Sarah felt a surge of nausea. She turned, looking for a way out, but the kitchen door was already occupied. David stood there, his perfectly symmetrical face twisted into an expression of profound disappointment. He wasn't the man she'd married. He was the supervisor of her prison. "Sarah, honey," David said, his voice dropping into that honeyed, soothing register he used whenever she was stressed. "You need to calm down. You're having another episode. We talked about this." "Don't," Sarah hissed, clutching the ledger to her chest. "Don't you dare honey me. I saw the book, David. I know who you are." David sighed, a long, weary sound. He leaned against the doorframe, cracking his knuckles in that rhythmic sequence. Thumb, index, pinky, pop, pop, pop. "I was hoping we could delay this conversation until you were in a more stable frame of mind. But since we're here, let's be rational." He stepped toward her, his hand reaching out as if to ground her. Sarah recoiled, her back hitting the cold stainless steel of the refrigerator. "I've been talking to the people at the firm, Sarah," David continued, his eyes locked onto hers with unblinking intensity. "Because of your recent outbursts, they're concerned about the integrity of the project. I've had to sign a stability clause. If you can't maintain your composure, Sarah, I won't be able to protect you from the medical team. They'll have to take you in for a recalibration. Do you understand what that means? Phase 1. Build hope." Sarah's mind raced, mapping the situation like the blueprints of a complex estate. She knew this tactic. David was trying to gaslight her, to make her doubt her own sanity so she'd surrender the evidence in her hands. But she had the ledger. She had the physical proof of their conspiracy. If she could just get to the authorities, if she could show a judge or a police officer this logbook, the stability clause wouldn't matter. The law would have to intervene. She just needed to play along for a moment, to find a window of opportunity. She took a deep breath, forcing her heart rate to slow, and lowered the ledger slightly. "You're right, David," she said, her voice trembling with a fake fragility. I'm overwhelmed. I need a minute to think. Can I go to the study? I'll sit down. We can talk about the clause." Phase 2. False positive. David's posture relaxed. The tension in his shoulders drained away, and that warm, leading man smile returned to his face. He stepped back, gesturing toward the hallway. "That's my girl. I knew you'd see reason, Sarah. We just want what's best for you. Go ahead. Take all the time you need. I'll have Eleanor make some tea." He even reached out and patted her arm, a gentle, reassuring touch that felt almost real. Sarah nodded, clutching the ledger, and began to walk toward the study. Her mind was already counting the steps to the phone. 1, 2, 3. She reached the study door, stepped inside, and felt a rush of triumph. She'd outsmarted him. She'd get to the phone, call 911, and this nightmare would be over. Phase 3, the crack. She lunged for the heavy mahogany desk, her fingers scrambling for the landline. She picked up the receiver, pressing it to her ear, ready to scream for help. But there was no dial tone. The line was dead. Not just silent, but empty, like a void. She frowned, clicking the hook repeatedly. Click, click, click. She pulled her cell phone from her pocket, her thumb hovering over the emergency call button. The screen glowed, but where the signal bars should have been, there was only a series of gray X's. A low, rhythmic humming began to vibrate through the floorboards, a sound like a swarm of bees trapped beneath the wood. Phase 4, catastrophic reveal. The study door clicked shut. Not a soft close, but the heavy metallic thud of a deadbolt sliding into place. Sarah whirled around. David wasn't outside the door. He was standing by the window, holding a small, sleek black device that pulsed with a steady blue light. "The stability clause isn't a threat, Sarah," David said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "It's a trigger. By refusing to comply and attempting to contact outside authorities, you've just authorized your own commitment. The jamming signal is already active. No one is coming." Sarah lunged for the door, pulling at the handle. It wouldn't budge. "Let me out. You can't do this." "I'm not doing it, Sarah." "You are," David replied, looking at his watch. "The medical transport is 3 minutes out. Because you tried to escape. The protocol changes from voluntary to forced. They won't just be taking you to a clinic. They're taking you to the black site in the mountains. You'll be sedated for months while they set your narrative." The realization hit Sarah like a physical blow to the stomach. Her attempt to be smart, to play along, had provided them with the exact behavioral evidence they needed to justify the most extreme version of their contingency plan. She hadn't bought herself time. She had signed her own warrant. The ledger in her hand felt suddenly, terrifyingly heavy. Not proof of her salvation, but the very document that would be used to diagnose her delusions. She was in a worse position than she had been 5 minutes ago, trapped in a soundproof room with a man who was no longer playing a husband, but a jailer. The humming in the floor grew louder, vibrating through the soles of her feet. Sarah backed away from the door, her eyes darting around the room, searching for a flaw in the geometry of her prison. The study felt smaller now, the heavy velvet curtains and dark wood paneling pressing in on her. The air smelled of old paper and the sharp, ozone tang of the jamming device. She could hear the faint, rhythmic ticking of the clock on the mantel. A clock with no hands, she realized with a jolt of horror. It just hummed, marking a time that didn't exist. "Why?" she whispered, her voice cracking. "Why go to all this trouble? Why me?" David walked over to the desk, his movements precise and efficient. He picked up a silver letter opener, turning it over in his hands. "Because you are the perfect variable, Sarah. You're brilliant, you're observant, and you have no one else. You were the ideal candidate for Project Phoenix. We wanted to see if we could build a life so perfect, so structurally sound, that even someone like you wouldn't want to leave." "It's not perfect," Sarah spat. "It's a lie. The trees are too straight, David. The dog doesn't even know me." As if on cue, a low, guttural growl vibrated through the floor. Buster, the golden retriever she'd raised from a puppy, was outside the study door. But the sound wasn't the playful bark she knew. It was the sound of a predator. The dog scratched at the wood, a frantic, violent sound that made Sarah's skin crawl. "Buster is part of the security detail, Sarah," David said, his eyes never leaving hers. "He's trained to respond to elevated cortisol levels. Right now, to him, you're an intruder." The house began to groan. It wasn't the wind or the settling of old timber. It was the sound of movement behind the walls. Sarah saw the family photos, the ones of her graduation, her wedding, their trips to the coast, start to rattle against the floral wallpaper. They shifted and tilted, a frantic, mechanical vibration that suggested people were moving through hidden corridors just inches away. The kitchen door burst open, and Miller, the guard from the driveway, stumbled in. His wrist was wrapped in a thick, blood-stained bandage, and his face was twisted in a snarl of pure rage. He didn't look like a professional anymore. He looked like a man who wanted a pound of flesh. "She broke my goddamn arm," Miller growled, his eyes fixed on Sarah. He reached for a heavy pair of zip ties on his belt. Sarah didn't think. She acted. Her hand closed around a heavy cast-iron skillet that had been left on the counter. A prop for a family dinner that would never happen. As Miller lunged for her, she swung with every ounce of strength she had left. The heavy iron connected with the side of Miller's head with a dull, sickening clack. Miller crumpled like a discarded suit, his head hitting the linoleum with a heavy thud. Sarah didn't stay to see if he was breathing. She dove for the cellar door, the only exit that wasn't blocked by David or the encroaching security team. She tumbled down the wooden stairs, the air growing colder and damper with every step. The cellar smelled of earth and industrial bleach, a suffocating combination that burned her nostrils. She reached the bottom and slammed the heavy oak door shut, throwing the iron bolt just as David's weight hit the other side. "Sarah, don't make this harder." David's voice boomed through the door, but it sounded different now. He was using the house's PA system, his voice amplified until it vibrated in her very marrow. He sounded like a god, cold and omnipresent. Sarah backed away from the door, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She was in the dark, the only light coming from a single flickering bulb hanging from the ceiling. She began to count, her voice a frantic whisper. 1, 2, 3, 4. She needed to know the dimensions. If she knew the space, she couldn't be trapped. The cellar was larger than she remembered. The stone walls were slick with moisture, and the floor was packed dirt. In the center of the room sat a heavy steel safe, its doors swinging wide and empty. The interior was lined with soft, blue velvet, looking more like a cradle than a vault. She moved toward the back of the cellar, her hands skimming the rough stone. Her fingers caught on something, a seam in the wall that didn't belong. She pushed, and a section of the stonework slid back with a grinding groan, revealing a hidden wardrobe. Sarah pulled the doors open. Inside, rows of children's clothes hung on neat wooden hangers. A yellow sundress she remembered wearing to a picnic when she was 6. A pair of denim overalls from a summer at the lake. A red velvet dress from a Christmas morning. She reached out, her fingers trembling as she touched the fabric of the sundress. It felt new. Too new. She turned the collar inside out, searching for something, anything, to prove her memories were real. There, stitched into the seam, was a small white silk tag. Made in China, 100% cotton, 2023. The world shattered. The memories of that picnic, the smell of the grass, the taste of the lemonade, the feel of the sun on her back. They were all artificial. The dress hadn't existed 20 years ago. It had been manufactured last year to populate a room she was never supposed to find. "It's not real," she whispered, the words lost in the hum of the house. "None of it is real. Your biological parents died in the collapse, Sarah. David's voice boomed from the rafters, echoing off the stone walls. We didn't lie about that. We just gave you a better version of what came after. We gave you a legacy. Why would you want the truth when the lie is so much kinder? Sarah sank to the floor, the ledger clutched to her chest. She felt a hollow, aching void where her history used to be. Every milestone, every holiday, every I love you from Eleanor and Robert. It was all part of a production budget. But then, her eyes caught a flicker of movement near the floor. A small rectangular vent, half hidden behind a stack of rusted garden tools. A ventilation shaft. She scrambled toward it, her fingers tearing at the metal grating. It was narrow, barely wide enough for her shoulders, and clogged with years of dust and spiderwebs. But it led out. It led to the world beyond the script. She squeezed herself into the shaft, the cold metal biting into her skin. The space was suffocating, the air thick with the smell of damp earth and decay. She crawled, her fingernails breaking as she clawed her way through the dirt. 10, 11, 12. She counted the inches, her mind focused on the singular goal of reaching the end. She emerged into the night air near the barn, her clothes torn and her skin smeared with grime. The Hudson Valley mist was even thicker now, a white wall that swallowed the light from the house. She stayed low, moving toward the barn. She needed her car keys, but she knew the SUV was likely disabled. She needed a way out that they wouldn't expect. As she reached the shadow of the barn's massive wooden doors, a figure stepped out of the gloom. It was Robert, her father. He wasn't holding a newspaper or a glass of iced tea. He was dressed in tactical gear, a sleek, matte black tranquilizer rifle cradled in his arms. His posture was rigid, military, his eyes scanning the darkness with a predator's focus. "That's far enough, Sarah," Robert said, his voice booming and jovial, yet utterly cold. He adjusted his tie 3 times, a rhythmic, obsessive gesture that Sarah realized was a signal. "You've had your fun. Now, be a good girl and come back inside. Eleanor has dinner waiting." He raised the rifle, the laser sight a tiny, dancing red dot on Sarah's chest. "You aren't my father," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the trembling in her limbs. "You're just a soldier playing dress-up." Robert laughed, a hollow, theatrical sound. "I'm the man who kept you safe for 20 years, Sarah. That counts for more than blood in this world." Sarah looked up at the barn structure. She knew this building. She'd mapped its weak points months ago, thinking she was just being thorough for a landscaping project. The main support beam on the north side was notched, a structural flaw that had always bothered her. She didn't run. She lunged. She threw her weight against the notched beam, kicking it with every bit of desperation she possessed. The wood groaned, a deep, primal sound of failure. Above them, a massive stack of hay bales, held in place by a precarious pulley system, began to shift. Robert looked up, his eyes widening in realization. But it was too late. The support gave way, and a ton of dried grass and heavy timber came crashing down. The sound was like a mountain collapsing. Dust exploded into the air, a choking cloud that blinded Sarah as she dove for cover. She heard Robert's sharp cry of surprise, followed by the heavy thud of the bales hitting the floor. Silence rushed back in, heavy and thick. Sarah crawled forward, her lungs burning. Robert was buried, his legs pinned beneath a massive timber. He was alive, but he wasn't going anywhere. The tranquilizer rifle lay in the dirt a few feet away. Sarah grabbed it, along with a heavy-duty flashlight from Robert's belt. She didn't look back. She retreated to the back of the barn, the silence ringing in her ears. She needed to know the end of the story. She opened the ledger to the very last page, her hands shaking so hard the flashlight beam danced across the paper. There, at the bottom of a final, legal-looking document, was a signature. David Miller, lead actor/project manager. And below that, the terms of his contract. 10 years of service. A payout of $5 million upon the successful transition of the subject to Phase 5. David hadn't just been her jailer. He'd been her husband for a paycheck. Every kiss, every shared secret, every plan for their future. It was all a performance aimed at a year-end bonus. Sarah felt a cold, hard knot form in her chest. The grief was gone, replaced by a crystalline, focused rage. She wasn't a victim anymore. She was the one who knew the layout of the prison. She heard the sound of engines in the distance. The security team was closing in. She could see the sweep of flashlights through the trees, a dozen tiny suns searching for her in the dark. She didn't head for the road. She headed for the woods. The estate forest was a labyrinth, a circular maze designed to disorient and trap. But Sarah was a landscape architect. She didn't see trees. She saw patterns. She saw the way the moss grew on the north side of the uniform trunks. She saw the subtle tilt of the land toward the hidden service road the actors used for their deliveries. She moved with the silence of a ghost, her feet finding the softest patches of earth. 22, 23, 24. She counted her paces, mapping her progress against the stars that peeked through the canopy. She reached the edge of the woods and saw it. A narrow ribbon of asphalt that didn't appear on any map. A delivery truck was idling near a gate, its engine a low, rhythmic throb in the night. Sarah didn't hesitate. She ran for the truck, her breath coming in short, sharp bursts. She reached the passenger door just as the driver was shifting into gear. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry," the driver shouted, a young man with messy red hair and a uniform 2 sizes too big. He looked terrified, his hands gripping the wheel as if it were a life raft. "Drive," Sarah commanded, climbing into the cab and pointing the tranquilizer rifle at the dashboard. "Just drive." "I'm sorry, I didn't see you. I'm so sorry," the boy sobbed, flooring the accelerator. The truck roared to life, the tires screaming as they tore away from the estate. Sarah looked back and saw the lights of the farmhouse fading into the mist. The cage was open. 2 days later, Sarah sat in a sterile glass office in downtown Boston. The air smelled of ozone and expensive floor wax. Across from her sat a woman she'd never met, a woman with sharp, bird-like features and silver hair pinned back so tightly it looked painful. Martha Williams, her grandmother. Phase 1, Build Hope. Sarah felt a strange sense of calm as she laid the ledger on the marbled desk. She had the leverage now. She'd spent 48 hours documenting every lie, every forged signature, every modern tag on a vintage dress. She had enough evidence to bury Project Phoenix and everyone involved in it. She wasn't here for revenge. She was here for her freedom. She'd drafted a settlement, a legal separation from David, a massive financial payout to fund her new life, and a permanent restraining order against the firm. It was a perfect, logical exit strategy. Martha looked at the ledger, her expression unreadable, and then back at Sarah. "You've done well, Sarah," the old woman whispered. "You've proven your resilience. That was always the goal." Sarah felt a surge of confidence. She'd won. She'd outplayed the architects of her own life. Phase 2, False Positive. Martha reached into a drawer and pulled out a fountain pen, its gold nib gleaming in the harsh office lights. She signed the settlement papers without a word, her hand steady and precise. "It's done," Martha said, pushing the documents across the desk. "The project is terminated. You are free to go, Sarah. You have your money, your name, and your life back. I hope you find the peace you're looking for." Sarah took the papers, her heart soaring. The weight that had been crushing her since the night at the farmhouse finally lifted. She stood up, the ledger tucked under her arm, feeling like a person for the first time in years. She walked toward the door, her mind already planning the garden she would build, a real garden, with crooked trees and wild, untamed flowers. Phase 3. The crack. She reached the door, but it didn't open. There was no handle, just a smooth sheet of glass. She turned back to Martha, a frown creasing her forehead. "The door?" she asked, her voice echoing in the silent room. Martha didn't look up. She was looking at a monitor on her desk, a high-definition feed of the very office they were sitting in. Sarah watched the screen and saw herself standing at the door. But something was wrong. In the corner of the screen, a timer was counting down. 0003, 0002, 0001. And then, a small red light began to blink on the ceiling of the office. Phase 4. Catastrophic reveal. "The settlement isn't the end of the project, Sarah," Martha said, her voice sounding flat and distant, as if it were coming through a speaker. "It's the beginning of Phase 6, the escapee narrative." The walls of the office began to shift. The glass panels slid back, revealing that the office building was actually a massive soundstage. Beyond the windows, there was no Boston skyline, only a vast, black void filled with scaffolding and camera rigs. "We needed to see how you would handle the revelation of the lie," Martha continued, her image flickering on the monitor. The woman sitting across from Sarah didn't move. She was an animatronic, her skin a perfect synthetic silicone. The grandmother, the settlement, the freedom. It's all part of the study. We wanted to see if you would choose a new lie, if it felt like a victory. Sarah looked at the settlement papers in her hand. The ink was already fading, the signatures disappearing as the chemically treated paper reacted to the air. "You haven't escaped, Sarah," the voice boomed from the rafters. "You've just moved to a larger set. The cottage in Massachusetts, we've already built it. The real garden, we've already planted the seeds. Your resilience is our most valuable data point. We can't let it go to waste." The floor beneath Sarah's feet began to move, a slow mechanical rotation that carried her toward a new exterior set. She saw the modest cottage, the white picket fence, the small patch of dirt waiting for her. It looked perfect. It looked exactly like the life she wanted. And that was the horror of it. They knew her so well that they could build her a heaven that was still a cell. Sarah dropped the fading papers, her lips moving in a silent, broken rhythm. 1, 2, 3, 4. She began to count the steps to the edge of the stage, her eyes fixed on the darkness beyond the lights. She reached the perimeter, the literal edge of the world, and looked down. It was a drop of 50 feet to the concrete floor of the hangar. She looked back at the cottage. She saw David standing on the porch, wearing a flannel shirt and holding a tray of lemonade. He waved, that perfect, honeyed smile back on his face. "Welcome home, Sarah," he called out. Sarah turned back to the darkness. She didn't have a map. She didn't have a ledger. She didn't have a history. But she had the count. She stepped off the edge. She didn't fall into a net. She didn't hit the floor. She hit the water, the cold, dark, unscripted water of the harbor that the hangar had been built over. She swam. She swam until her lungs burned and her limbs felt like lead. She swam until the lights of the production facility were nothing more than a faint, flickering star in the distance. She washed up on a rocky shore miles away, the air smelling of salt and rotting seaweed. It was a terrible, beautiful smell. She stood up, her legs trembling, and looked at the horizon. There were no cameras here, no hidden microphones, no uniform trees. She began to walk. She didn't count the steps. She didn't measure the distance. She just moved, her feet finding their own rhythm on the uneven ground. She found a small town, a place of peeling paint and crooked sidewalks, and people who didn't know her name. She found a job at a local nursery, digging in the dirt until her fingernails were permanently stained with earth. She planted a garden. It was a messy, chaotic thing, full of weeds and stubborn vines and flowers that bloomed whenever they felt like it. It was structurally unsound and geographically confused. It was real. And as Sarah stood in the center of her wild, unscripted world, she realized that her resilience wasn't a data point. It wasn't a heritage. It was simply the truth of who she was when the lights went out. She looked up at the sky, at the stars that were scattered across the blackness like spilled salt. They weren't aligned. They weren't a map. They were just light, burning millions of miles away, indifferent and ancient. Sarah breathed in the cold, damp air, and for the first time in her life, she didn't count the seconds. She just lived them.